What did you overhear when someone didn't know you understood their language? When I was in college, I studied abroad in Germany for a year. Before that, I'd taken 4 solid years of German classes, plus a summer intensive course. I wasn't perfect, my grammar slipped sometimes, and my accent was obviously foreign, but I could carry on a real conversation. The thing is, I didn't look like someone who spoke German. I have a very American look, and people often assumed I was just another clueless exchange student who only knew how to say danke and order a beer. That assumption led to one of the strangest, most uncomfortable situations of my life. One rainy afternoon, I ducked into a small cafe near campus to read and wait out the weather. It was cozy, low lighting, the smell of coffee and pastries, quiet chatter all around. I ordered in German, and though the waiter understood me fine, I could tell by his polite smile that my accent gave me away. I took a seat by the window, cracked open a book, and got lost in the sound of rain. A few minutes later, 2 German girls sat down at the tiny table right next to mine. They were maybe my age, trendy, laughing in that casual way that makes you feel like you're intruding even though you're just sitting quietly nearby. At first, I didn't pay them much attention, but then one of them tilted her head toward me and said softly in German, "Schau mal, der Amerikaner da. Sieht aus, als hätte sich verlaufen." Look at the American. He looks like he got lost. Her friend giggled. Ja, bestimmt nur hier zum Saufen und Feiern. Versteht sowieso kein Wort. Yeah, he's probably only here to drink and party. He doesn't understand a word anyway. I froze for half a second, but kept my eyes on my book. My heart was pounding because suddenly I wasn't just reading, I was eavesdropping on myself being judged in real time. They weren't being vicious, but the way they laughed stung. I was trying so hard to immerse myself in the culture, and here I was being reduced to the stereotype of a dumb American abroad. I stayed silent though, pretending to be absorbed in my book. Then their conversation drifted. They started gossiping about people from their class, professors, weekend plans. Their tone shifted, less playful, more conspiratorial. One of them lowered her voice and said, denkt, ich bin treu, aber eigentlich schlafe ich seit Wochen mit seinem besten Freund. He thinks I'm loyal, but honestly I've been sleeping with his best friend for weeks. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard correctly, but she kept talking, laughing nervously while her friend gasped and egged her on. They dissected every detail from how she hid her text to how her boyfriend was too naive to ever notice. And then, as if fate wanted to test my poker face, the guy she was trashing walked into the cafe. I recognized him instantly. He wasn't just some German guy. He was a student in my exchange program, not close to me, but familiar enough that I knew his name, had sat through classes with him, even done group projects nearby. He came over, kissed her on the cheek, sat down, completely oblivious. She transformed in a heartbeat, smiling sweetly, touching his arm, asking about his day. If I hadn't just heard her confession, I would have thought they were a perfectly happy couple. Meanwhile, I was sitting one table over, holding a coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping me anchored to reality. I wanted to scream, dude, she's lying to you, but I also knew that would expose me for eavesdropping and break the illusion that I didn't understand. So I sat there, in this bizarre double life. To them, I was just a background character, a clueless foreigner, but in my head, I knew the entire plot twist they were hiding. That half hour felt like forever. I pretended to keep reading, but every word blurred on the page. All I could hear was their laughter, her fake sweet tone, his casual happiness. It was like watching a play when you already know the tragic ending. I wrestled with myself for days after. Should I tell him? Should I drop a hint? Was it even my business? Eventually, I decided to stay out of it. Relationships are complicated, and I didn't want to be the random foreign student who blew up someone else's life based on what I overheard. But a few weeks later, word spread anyway. The guy found out from someone else, dumped her, and it turned into a storm of drama. The details didn't surprise me at all. What did surprise me was how much the experience stuck with me. I realized that when people assume you can't understand, they reveal raw, unfiltered versions of themselves. No performance, no masks, just honesty, sometimes cruel, sometimes careless, sometimes dangerous. It also changed the way I carried myself in public. On trains, in parks, at bars, I started noticing conversations all around me. I didn't eavesdrop intentionally, but my ears picked things up automatically. And more than once, I heard people underestimating me, assuming I was too foreign to grasp what they were saying. There's something unsettling about being invisible like that. You feel both powerful and powerless at the same time. You know things you shouldn't, but you can't always act on them. That day in the cafe taught me more than any class about human nature. People let their guard down when they think you're not listening, and sometimes what you overhear will change the way you look at them forever. So yeah, the wildest thing I overheard was a girl admitting to cheating on her boyfriend right before he walked in and kissed her hello. And she had no idea the clueless American at the next table understood every word. What happened to the class clown after graduation? When I think about the idea of a class clown, one face immediately comes to mind, Marcus. If you went to my high school, you couldn't have missed him. He wasn't just the kid who made occasional jokes or pulled little pranks. Marcus was the kind of person who made an entire room shift the moment he walked in. He had this mix of mischief and charm that teachers couldn't fully hate, and students couldn't help but love. He was the guy who could imitate every teacher's voice so perfectly that people begged him to do it at lunch. The guy who could turn a boring announcement into a comedy sketch. The guy who could diffuse tension in the room just by saying something so ridiculous that everyone burst out laughing. What made Marcus different from the average funny kid was that he wasn't mean. His jokes weren't about tearing people down. He had an instinct for humor that united people instead of dividing them. Even teachers, who often rolled their eyes when he interrupted class, sometimes fought back smiles when he nailed one of his one-liners. There was this math teacher who was notorious for being stone-faced and serious, and one day Marcus raised his hand and asked, completely deadpan, "Excuse me, but if we're calculating how many pizzas could fit inside this triangle, are we assuming thin crust or deep dish?" The teacher tried to keep it together, but she cracked a grin, and for weeks after that, people still brought up the pizza triangle. That was Marcus in a nutshell, someone who could make even the most rigid adult forget themselves for a moment. But Marcus wasn't an academic star. He barely passed some of his classes, and he didn't play sports, so he wasn't a traditional school hero. Humor was his thing, and everyone assumed it was just part of his teenage personality. People joked all the time that he'd be a comedian or an actor someday, but there was also this unspoken assumption that he'd eventually grow out of it, that he'd settle into some normal life, maybe working in retail or doing construction, and just be the funny guy people remembered from high school. After graduation, that seemed to be exactly what happened. While people went off to college or started careers, Marcus stayed quiet. No big college acceptance posts, no glamorous job updates. Someone said he was working at a gas station. Someone else said they saw him at a grocery store cracking jokes behind the register. For a while, it felt like he just faded into the background of adult life. It was almost disappointing. Like, really? The funniest guy in school just became another person stocking shelves? But then I stumbled across him again in the most unexpected way. I was scrolling YouTube one night, half bored, clicking random videos, and there he was. The thumbnail was grainy, but I recognized his face instantly. He was on stage at a tiny comedy club, holding a microphone, sweat glistening under cheap stage lights, and even though the video only had a couple hundred views, I clicked it. The moment he started talking, it was like being transported back into high school. The same rhythm, the same timing, the same way of pulling people in and making them feel like they were part of the joke. Some of the material was rough, some jokes didn't land, but the core of what made him funny was all still there, just raw and unpolished. I couldn't believe it. While the rest of us were moving into stable jobs and degrees, Marcus was actually doing the thing we all joked he'd do. He was chasing comedy. And it wasn't just a one-time video either. His channel had a handful of clips from open mic nights, small shows, little bar gigs. He wasn't famous, but he was trying, and you could see him slowly getting better. The real confirmation of his progress came at our 5-year reunion. Walking into the event, there was all the usual awkwardness. People comparing jobs, talking about who was engaged, who was still in school. Then Marcus showed up. Same grin grin, same energy, but now he had stories. Not just high school stories, but road stories, comedy stories. He talked about bombing on stage in front of 12 drunk people in some dive bar, and he told it so vividly that the entire reunion was in stitches. He said he'd been invited to open for a comedian who actually had a name, and that alone made him the most interesting person in the room. What hit me hardest was something he said when people asked if he thought he'd make it big. Marcus laughed and said, "I don't know if I'll ever be famous, but if I can make 50 strangers laugh in a dark room on a Thursday night, that's enough for me. That's still living my dream." And hearing that was kind of profound, because for most of us, the dream shrinks as we get older. We adjust, we compromise, we stop chasing it. Marcus hadn't. He was still the class clown, but now he was clowning on his own terms, in front of people who wanted to be there, people who paid to laugh. Now, years later, he's not a household name, but he's not invisible either. He has a modest online following, he tours smaller comedy clubs, and every once in a while one of his clips goes viral. He makes enough to live, and he seems happy. And whenever I see his stuff pop up online, it always makes me smile. Because while the rest of us blended into adulthood, Marcus took the thing everyone thought was just a phase and built his life around it. So what happened to the class clown after graduation? In our case, he never stopped being funny. He just found a bigger audience than a high school classroom. And honestly, that's the most fitting ending imaginable.